Hi, and welcome back to the Trans Talk Up podcast. I'm your host, Alyssa, alongside
Braxton, what's up, everybody?
hello. And today we're going to talk about the perception of being trans, and how that is, and maybe how, just as trans people, we could maybe view things a little bit differently. So, to kick that off, I want to kind of talk about something because it's kind of been speaking to me as of late, and I think that's a good reason why we wanted to kind of kick off this episode here. Is this, this is kind of something that I struggle with, like perception. Sometimes we can get lost in, especially like with the idea of passing in this world as a trans person. I think sometimes we can get lost in how other people are perceiving us, and sometimes we do too much and we get lost from the for the simple thing that we should hold on to, which is being trans is a unique experience. Like, I'm not saying like you shouldn't be worried about passing. Like, passing equals some sort of easier passage to certain things, right? Like,
Sure.
you might get to like go places and less people look at you or stare at you or whatever. So
Right.
it's not to say that we shouldn't still be focused on, passing or doing what we can to pass, etc. Because I think that is important, especially if you don't want any sort
hmm
of backlash. But I think that like there is a moment that you have to kind of step back and you have to kind of ask yourself, am I doing too much? Am
Right.
I too worried about the perception, or people's perception rather, of me as it relates to my transition?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that, passing has brought me and most trans people a lot of comfort, but I think when you highlight it too much, you start to give too much attention and too much thought to how you're being perceived, and you start to lose some of what makes you you and who you are. And honestly, like the difference you can make in the world when it comes to trans people and people's perception of us. So I think sometimes we kind of skew the perception by being so focused on perception.
Absolutely. Like, I see a bunch of like TikTok videos, where these people are like, oh, I have to have this done. Oh, I have to have that done. And even sometimes I do that, like I look at certain
Same.
things and I think, I need to go do whatever the certain thing is for myself. But
hmm
at the end of the day, my thinking is that I think some of the reason why the trans community is maybe not as close as maybe it used to be is because we have gotten kind of far from like where we should be. Like, I think it's also kind of a slippery slope, right? Because while I'm saying that, like, hey, we're people who like experience kind of both sides of the equation, right? Like,
Yeah.
I've lived X amount of my life, experiencing things in society as a man, and then I've
Right.
also kind of experienced of what it's like to live life in society as a woman, to an extent,
Right.
obviously, because
Sure.
there's a lot of things that I just can't experience.
Right.
However, I think, well, I don't think, I know that we're the only people in life that can experience kind of both of those things. So I think that does speak to the uniqueness of being trans. And I think some people, even myself included at times, I think that's where maybe we should be happy and kind of celebrate, mostly to ourselves. I'm not talking that we should, you know,
Go
go
throw
throw a
praise.
pride parade or anything like that, because that's where it becomes too much, right? Because
Right.
with anything in life, you can either do things where it hurts you, or you can do things that is more complimentary to yourself. And I think if we lose who we are, we kind of fall down like a rabbit hole, right? And then it just, like, a lot of negativity follows and it's worse on us. So I think to
Absolutely.
know who we are, even while we're trying to pursue our certain look or whatever it might be for ourselves, we still have to be grounded in the idea that it's okay to be trans. And even if someone does perceive you as being trans, it's not the end of the world. It's
Right.
okay,
Right.
and it's all a progression. I keep telling myself every day, like, you're only 2 years in, like,
Right.
you probably will look 10 times different 10 years from now. But as of now, you're 2 years in, you're doing what you can at 2 years. So I think it's important.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think that we see a lot of this like too much of a good thing on both sides, right? So like if we're talking in regards to like the far left, right, we've got these major parades and a lot of like screaming and pointing fingers because they're so trans, right? Like everything is like, look at me, I'm trans, I'm so proud of it, yada yada. I think that there is a healthy part of that But when you push it too far, obviously, as we see, like it starts to make people kind of see you as like just totally insufferable when it comes to being trans. And this is your whole personality and it's every last thing about you. And being trans 100% is a thing about us. And it is a very unique thing about us, but it doesn't have to be the thing about us, right? It's all of these other things. But then you also see trans people on the far right. I've been guilty of both of these things that I'm talking about also, where you're overcompensating so much on your perception that you are willing to kind of bend the knee a little bit to those that don't understand us. And I think that that's unhealthy because now you're almost kind of giving them a pass to continue hateful behavior or hateful speech or hateful language in regards to trans people. I see this with a lot of people that I've become friends with on TikTok in this realm of things, right? They're so quick to deny themselves of things, and it gets a little frustrating because I care about these people. I love them. I think they're wonderful people, but they're losing sight of you are still trans. You can recognize your biology and not want kids to have surgeries and not do all these things, but you are also still trans. And I think that's the saddest part about our community is this huge separation. And it's because we're doing too much on both sides. And I think that goes for any community, really, right? But in ours specifically, it's like you should be proud of who you are and celebrate that it's unique. But if you can have a level-headedness to yourself where the left is lacking and some honesty about who you are, but some standing in your ground on I am trans and I am proud of who I am that the people on the right are lacking that are trans, and we find this middle ground, you're able to change people's perception of trans people in a far healthier way and make it stick. I've had the opportunity to do this so many times, and it's more rewarding to get to have a conversation with a person where they don't understand who you are. And by the end of it, they still might be a little like, well, I don't get it, but I at least have a respect for it now. I'm gonna change the way I talk about it because I know you and I respect you and I'm listening to what you're saying. Because when I speak on these things, I'm not just speaking for Braxton, right? I'm speaking for Alyssa. I'm speaking in defense of trans people that might fall on the right, trans people that might fall on the left, trans people as a whole. I want the world to be a better place for all of us, not just someone who 100% agrees with me. Being trans is hard. It's not easy all the time. It gets easier over time, sure, but it's not easy by any means. Easier does not equate to easy. And so, I want to be a part of making this world easier for us to navigate and for us to get along with our counterparts, those that don't walk this life and don't really have a way to understand it.
Yeah, and I think that should be the goal for I think a lot of us. I think once we kind of come to that conclusion as a whole, I think that's when we'll start to see more progression within society and things like that. I think something you said there really kind of spoke to me because I've been guilty of and I think and you can tell me if you think I'm wrong because I'm not
Sure.
just trying to come up with an excuse here. So if you disagree with me, feel free to call me out. We
Of
have a great
course.
relationship. I can take it if
Of
I'm wrong.
course.
However, so for a while like I used to like do my own TikTok lives and I used to I used to hold those ones where I'd be like, trans women, it was the whole trans women aren't women and all of
Right.
that stuff. So some of my points I still hold true, but I think that like if I go back and I ask myself like what was the real reason that I was holding those lives?
Hmm.
Well, in all fairness, I was trying to show the people who typically would not agree with someone like myself or they would not give someone like me the time of day because they'd be
Hmm.
like, "Oh, we, this that and the other, right?" So kind of, I don't know if I would just say like the gender criticals, because a lot of them would come into my live and they'd be supportive, because they'd be like,
Right.
oh, so you are against, like the I don't know, like the
Like
sports
the night
thing, and
out.
you're against the kids transitioning, and I'm not saying that I disagree with a lot of that. Like as it stands, I still agree that like if you're going to transition, you should do it at 18 plus. The sports thing, I think that gets a little watery because I think if it's like a physical sport, that's kind of where I stand. Is so I have a kind of a more complex view on that than I think maybe some people do because I don't think it's cut and dry as much as a lot of
Sure.
people make that up to be like it is cut and dry. Because I think if it's a physical sport, it makes 100% sense that there should be some separation, and trans
Right.
people maybe should figure out. how they want to proceed. But what I'm getting at here, and like the whole, trans women aren't women, like it's hard to say that like trans women don't have like a womanly experience out in the world. But yeah,
Right.
sure, like we are inherently still biologically male and all of that stuff. So it's not that I disagree with what I was saying. However, I think it boils down to why was I doing it? I was trying
Right.
to get a better perception
Hmm.
of the group of people who are typically against us. And I
Right.
and I knew that, and I'm sure some people might be like, "Oh, so you were trying to be a pick me." And it's not even that. It's like,
Right.
even though I have
The
these
intent was
opinions,
there.
I was trying to make a difference by showing people like, "Hey, you could still get people to understand who you are, and you know what I mean, like you can host these things." But I think that's why I kind of stopped doing those lives, is because I kind of felt bad about that. I was like, well, even though I
Yeah.
feel
Sure.
this way on these topics, maybe I need to do it for a different reason other than just trying to get people who wouldn't typically agree with someone like you and I. And so I think that's kind of why I stopped to that. So I'd be curious on your opinion on that.
No, I get it. I've done the same thing. I think you and I both were kind of in that same realm for a while. Over the last, like, I don't know, handful of months, maybe even a little longer, I've really been reevaluating myself, my views, my beliefs, where I stand on things. Because I don't ever want to be stagnant, right? I want to be a person that is able to evolve. I'm able to remain objective to things and think about things very open mindedly, be open to new information, be open to admitting when I'm wrong, all of those things, right? I want to be a growing person. I don't want to be a stagnant person. And I think, yeah, no, I'm 100% guilty of the same thing. And it's like you said, like the intent behind it has always been pure, always. I never do anything just to try to be like blatantly hateful to anybody. That's a lot of the reason I started doing my own lives, was because so many of them on TikTok get crazy and just brutal and vicious, and it's just like not even enjoyable at a certain point. You can't have a grown-up conversation. It's just people screaming at each other. And so that was a lot of the reason I did it, but I still followed suit in a lot of the backgrounds I would use, or, the prompts that we were going based off of. It's unfortunate because those apps, especially TikTok, it kind of, if you want people to listen, you want people to hop in and you want an opportunity to speak to people that are different than you kind of have to rage bait a bit. And I think you and I are probably at the same point with that, where we're like, I don't want to. I don't want to rage bait people. I don't want to, like, I do want to have conversations, but I don't want to continue to do that at a cost, because even that starts to mess with the perception. And I think a lot of it too comes down to how we're perceived, like on a personal level, is could be another motivator for us doing that, is that I don't want myself to be perceived a certain way. So let me go out of my way to have, bring this person in to have this conversation. See, well, but don't look at me like I'm not like the rest of them. And while that is true, do I have to do it in that way? No, because then it's just hurting the other side of things. So even if the intent is pure, doesn't mean that it goes without harm, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, 100%. Kind of where I've kind of, I guess, refocused in a way is like, just like, for example, like I think the podcast is a good example. You
Mhm.
and I can speak about certain topics in a certain way, and we can share how we feel, just
Right.
as a conversation between you and I. When we're conversating, we're not trying to prove anyone, like prove a certain point or whatever. We're just talking about a certain topic. And so I think that feels better for me.
Yeah.
But like I said, I don't want to go on lives anymore and have to put a background like trans women aren't women, because then it's like, girl, what are you doing? Like,
Right.
you're trying to be a pick me, you're trying to this, you're trying to that, and it's like it becomes that whole thing. And it's, like you said, the the intention is pure, right? I just want to show
Of
people
course.
that like the typical idea of what most people see, like I'm not a Lil Latino. I'm not some of these other trans people who get a bad rep,
Mm.
I'm not those people. But I think the I guess something that is kind of going to be more beneficial to people like you and I is just to like step out into the world, have conversations, and let people genuinely see that you're not like these other people. Just be
Right.
yourself. Don't have a premeditated idea of like, oh, if I post this topic, this is the response it's going to get. because that's kind of what happened with the TikTok lives. We both knew if we put this background right here, this is
Hmm.
the type of people that's going to join. We knew that. We're smart people. So
Of
I
course.
think that I think that's where it needs to go is like, let's just have genuine talks. If we happen to stumble across something where I mention my view on a certain thing and you're like, wait a minute, you're a trans woman and you feel that way? That's
Mhm.
crazy. You know,
Right.
that would be great because then I didn't say things or do something in order to be perceived a certain way, but you naturally got to see that that's who I was. I think that's important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had a client come in to my office at work one day and he's just like, Braxton, I think I'm a piece of shit. And I was like, okay, elaborate. Like, why do you feel this way? Like, I mean, let's dig into it. Let's talk about it. Obviously, you need to get it off your chest. And he's just kind of like, like the gay people, like I don't really like gay people and like the transgender thing, like I just think that's kind of stupid. And I was like, okay, well, and this client and I have had the opportunity to build respect between each other, right? I work in addiction and recovery. I watched this individual relapse and have to leave. And then luckily after our conversation, even though initially he decided he didn't want to come back, he did decide he wanted to come back. And I would like celebrated that with him. And it was just a very vulnerable moment. So we had this opportunity to build a relationship, a professional relationship, but a relationship. And I was like, okay, well, I'm gonna be like 100% truthful with you right now. Like I myself am trans. And he looked at me and he's like, what the fuck, Braxton? I was like, yeah. And I was like, I don't think you're a piece of shit, right? I think you're being a little too harsh on yourself. I'm going to assume based on what I know of you and your views and like your political standpoints and all of these things that you probably don't know a lot of trans people or really gay people in your personal life. And you're probably seeing a lot of these people online through TikTok, Facebook, the news even, right? And he's like, well, yeah, like I don't like have friends that are like that, I was like, well, most of us are just trying to live our lives, right? I'm like, you see me here every day working for all of you guys, whether I'm helping you with legal stuff or I'm trying to help you find a place to go once you leave here or whatever it might be, right? Like I'm constantly doing things, constantly trying to make sure that they are set up and that they're taken care of and they've got a safe place to process through things. I was like, I do that every day. I spend more time with you guys than I do my own family, right? There's a lot of trans people that are just working a job, trying to be a good person, living their life. They're not really messing with anybody. That is the majority of trans people. What you see is what's being pushed, right? By whoever wants this division to continue on. So do I think you're a piece of shit? No. I think you are a product of the environment and the content that you expose yourself to. What you decide to do with that now moving forward, that is what determines who you are as a person, right? But you haven't had the opportunity to meet someone and to actually have a real conversation with someone who understands that side of things. He's been very, very different since then. Very, very different since that conversation. And it's like you're saying, it's just real world. That's where it matters, right? And that's where I get worried about this complete disconnect. And I think people on the left are a little more guilty of this, but they don't even want to talk to anybody that's different than them. And that's where we fail, especially as trans people. Just learn to navigate your emotions before you allow your voice to speak your thoughts. If you can process the emotion behind it first and meet this person where they're at, you have the opportunity to do something really big and to change somebody's perspective. And who knows, he might go off now and tell other people when he hears somebody bad mouthing a trans person because he has a personal connection with someone that saw him for who he was and gave him the opportunity to work through it. He might now stand up and defend a trans person, right? Whereas the latter, if he would have only seen this stuff online, he would have continued to think that all trans people were stupid and just mentally ill and just like not contributing to society in any way, shape, or form, when that's not true. So it's like that's more important. Like you're not going to change anybody's view on TikTok. They're all there just to scream and yell at each other and to try to make you change. And it's just not going anywhere. It's redundant.
Well, I love that you brought that up because, you literally gave a real life example of why just stating certain things in real life, not through TikTok or anything else, has a significant difference. You made a significant difference on that guy. He
Yes.
probably, well, you basically said that he views you totally different because he acts differently now.
Yeah. Yeah.
When, I mean, I'm guessing before he probably just seen you as another guy that works there that helps out,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
Which is great.
Sure.
and you shocked the hell out of them when you said what you said. But I think
Yeah.
that's
It
important
was
because
crazy.
you got to say like, look, I'm going to give you a good example of what a trans person is. I'm not going to agree with you that you're a piece of shit. I'm actually going to tell you that you're the opposite of that, because
Right.
you're standing here having this conversation with me, which is already an important thing because you addressed that you even felt like you were a piece of shit by not liking gay people or not liking trans people. You wouldn't
Yeah.
mention those things if you were a true piece of shit who
Correct.
didn't care. So
Yeah.
you addressed you had the willingness to talk about it. And
Hmm.
it just so happens that he ran into the perfect person to have this conversation with,
Right.
which I think is amazing. I'm so
Right.
glad that both of you got to have that conversation, because for you it was kind of, I would imagine, I'm not here to speak for you, but I'm
Yeah.
imagining that it was like a breath of fresh air to be like, yes, I got to talk to someone who otherwise, if they never met me, wouldn't have felt how they would moving forward, because I got to
Absolutely.
have a normal conversation. And
Yeah.
even before that, they got to know me beforehand.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't know I was trans, right? But they knew that they could sense I was a good person. They could
Correct.
sense that I'm here to work at my 9 to 5 and do what I do. So
Yeah,
I
they could
think
trust.
that's important.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, so I think that kind of what you said is exactly what I mean. Like, let's just live life.
Hmm.
Let's not have any preconceived reasoning on why we're posting backgrounds on TikTok or why we're posting certain TikToks. Because we don't all need to rage bait to like get people to realize that we are not as crazy as they might perceive us to be because of one-off people or one-off stories on the news or whatever it might be, because most of the time you're not talking about the majority of trans people. But because people will see that if they've never met a true trans person, like everyone that I know that knows me, if they see something on TikTok or they see a news article, they'll typically come to me and be like, Alyssa, what do you think about this? Because they want my opinion, because they
Hmm.
don't want to speak about it, because they're like, well, here's Alyssa over here. Alyssa isn't like this person. They're
Right.
not like this other person in this news article. So it's like, Alyssa, how do you feel about seeing people talk about like your group this way? And
Yeah.
I'll react to it and I'll state my opinion on it. Most of the time they're like, Alyssa, you have the greatest opinions, we love that. And it's like, well, I'm just being real, and you either
Right.
like it, you agree with it, or you don't. Because I'm
Right.
also not, I also don't want people to think that like, I say certain things or whatever just to like get
Pet
people
peeve.
to agree, because I don't. I think that I'm a genuine person. If I genuinely
Absolutely.
disagreed with something, I would tell you. But
Yeah.
or if I genuinely agreed with something, I would tell you. But I
Yeah.
think it just so happens that like, because like I'm the same as you in the sense that like when I started my transition, I was probably the most leftist person that you could ever meet. Like I
Yeah.
was like, I am a woman, like nothing can stop me. Like,
Yeah.
like that's how I viewed. And then I feel like with anything, you have to learn, you have to
Of course.
progress to like
Of course.
have new knowledge. And once I gained that new knowledge of like, it's okay to say that I'm a trans woman. I don't have to say that I'm a woman,
Yeah.
because in every aspect I'm not, maybe in society, but it's like it's okay to say I'm a trans woman and leave it at that, or
Yeah.
I'm a transsexual because I've had surgery, or whatever it may be. Like I can say these certain things and be okay with it. I don't have to be all about like, no, I'm a woman. Like, it gets more problematic when you have that viewpoint, I feel like. But
Yeah.
once you
Of
kind of
course.
come to some realization and you're comfortable with who you are. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't somewhat get upset when people are like, oh, well, by the way, you're a biological male. It's like, oh my
Sure.
God, here we go with that story again. It's
Yeah.
like, you're not teaching me something I didn't already know. So it's like
Correct.
every
Correct.
trans person will probably, like, even if they say they don't, I am under the impression that like no trans person wants to be reminded of their biology.
Absolutely.
But at the same time, I think if it's someone who is denying their biology, then that's when they might need to be reminded of it, because it's like, well, you have forgotten, because you wouldn't be stating these stories if you didn't, or if you weren't ashamed of your biology. I think as
Right.
trans people, we shouldn't be ashamed of our biology, because that was a stepping stone to who we are today.
Right.
Because I am a biological male, I'm a trans woman. That is a requirement for me being a trans woman, and that's okay.
Yeah. It's just part of the story. Embrace it.
100%. Well, unless you have any closing thoughts, I think my points were made in this, in that, I think we should have genuine conversations with people. We should be, because they'll really start to, kind of feel you out for who you are. I
Yep.
think also we should spend less time into, being worried about how we're perceived out in society. Sure, if you want to like be like not run into issues, you should probably do everything in your power to like be as passing as you can if that's what you want. If you don't, well then, don't be surprised with the interactions you get.
Sure.
But I think those are some important things, because I think that like if we get less worried about how we're perceived, we'll be able to live and breathe easier as trans people, because there's
Absolutely.
too many of us, myself included at times, where we put too much into it, and like you said, we overcompensate. So,
Yep. Yep. I entirely agree.
all right. Well, I think that's basically the episode here. Hopefully you enjoyed the last episode as well as this episode. The plan is, unless anything changes, is to keep these rolling. Maybe every week or every other week. That's something that we'll have to figure out, but definitely interested in keeping the Trans Taco podcast going. Feel free to catch like our little clips here and there on TikTok.
Hmm.
As I typically will release like small digestible TikTok clips from the podcast. And if you're not subscribed, go ahead and subscribe if you enjoyed the content here. Post notifications, all of that stuff. And yeah, everyone have a great rest of your day.
Bye, guys.